Welcome everyone to our annual virtual Ready, Set, Go Wildfire Preparedness Webinar. I am Nani Barretto with Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization. We also have Elizabeth Pickett with us today. And together we will be sharing some tips and tricks that you can use to prepare your families, your homes, and your communities for wildfire. It is really great and very telling that so many folks have joined us on today's webinar. 120 of you registered, and we have about 58 and counting with us right now. That tells us, it at least tells me, that message is loud and clear that people want this information. They are seeking it out. So we want to thank each of you in advance for taking the time out of your busy schedules and prioritizing this information. I also want to give a big shout out to our sponsors this year for making this webinar possible. And they are Hawaiian Electric, the Richard Smart Fund of the Hawaii Community Foundation, and the State Division of Forestry and Wildlife. Some basic housekeeping before we begin. This is a webinar, so your cameras are turned off and you're all muted. The panelists will populate the chat box with resources and related information as we move throughout the presentation, so please keep your eye on that chat box. There is a Q&A feature on the Zoom toolbar where you can pose your questions, your comments, your other thoughts, so please use it. We will try to answer the questions as we go in that same space or at the end of the presentation. You can also follow up with us after the webinar if your questions went unanswered. And do know that we save your questions, we hear them, and we let them inform us on what your next information needs might be. Closed captions are also available, and you can turn those on and off as you please down on your toolbar by clicking on the live transcript button. And finally, we will send you an email after this webinar with a link to the recording and all the resources mentioned in today's presentation. So no need to scribble away and take notes on what you heard. We will follow up with you. With that, I am going to invite Mike Walker to say a few words before we get started. Mike joins us from the State Division of Forestry and Wildlife, and he serves as our state's fire protection forester. Thanks, Mike.
Aloha mai. My name is Mike Walker, as Nani said, and I am the fire protection forester at the administrative branch for Department of Land and Natural Resources, Division of Forestry and Wildlife, better known by the acronym as DOFA. So DOFA manages around 1 million acres, which is about 26% of the lands in the state, and we are the lead on fire response for those lands. We also co-respond with our county partners on lands adjacent, as well as if there's any needs outside of that, as well as federal firefighting agencies through mutual aid agreements that we have. It's my honor to be a part of this today and make sure people across Hawaii are as fire aware and fire prepared as possible. We work closely with Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization on wildfire related education and outreach initiatives. And I want to thank them for putting this together today, especially given this year's fire weather forecasts. Back to you, Nani.
Thanks, Mike. I also want to acknowledge and celebrate the fact that we have 55 folks on today's call that come from one of our 15 nationally recognized FireWise communities. That's a huge number for me. Not only are you folks learning some hopefully good stuff, but your attendance is helping your community maintain their national FireWise recognition this year. They get to report 1 hour of your volunteer time for being here. Quick poll to find out more about you. You're going to see this pop up in front of your screen. If you could take just a minute to share with us how familiar you are with the actions you can take to keep your families, your home, and your communities safe from wildfire. Please select how familiar you are with each of those. And you might have to scroll down to see questions 2 and 3. I'm going to give it another second. I see you all making your selections and submitting your responses. I appreciate that. It gives us a good chance to see what kind of audience we have with us today. And for sake of time, I'm going to end the poll and share the results back with you. And I'm just going to kind of scroll down here, and it looks like the majority of you are somewhat familiar with some of the actions you can take. So it's nice to know that we have, a diverse set of folks on today's webinar. Hopefully there's a little bit for everybody, and that we can all walk away feeling more confident about what we can do ahead of this year's dry season. A little bit about our organization, Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization. We are a nonprofit located on Hawaii Island, and we have been around since 2000, serving as the state's primary hub of wildfire information and mitigation. We consider it our privilege and a big responsibility. We take our job seriously to support our agency partners in protecting our island communities, our natural and cultural resources from wildfire. We can't see them, but I know we have some local fire departments here with us today on the call. So I do want to give them a big public shout out for always partnering with us on fire prevention and preparedness work, the work we do with our communities. Some key takeaways on the next screen. If nothing else, here's what we want you to leave knowing today. First, Hawaii has a big wildfire problem. Its impacts are broad and long lasting. Most fires are started by people, mostly accidentally, which means there are things we can do to prevent them. And it's going to take all of us to keep our families, our homes, and our communities safe. And there's a role for everyone. And the last is there's a lot we can do ahead of time, both individually and collectively. I am going to hand it over to Elizabeth to discuss fire in Hawaii and tell us why we should care.
Hi, thank you, Nani. Well, we want to start this webinar off with some foundational points. And those are that Hawaii has a wildfire problem, and that problem is increasing. And this is due to more drought episodes, the expansion of non-native fire-prone vegetation, especially grasses, and increasing accidental ignitions by people. And at this point, on average, we rival the westernmost fire-prone states in the US in terms of the percentage of land area of our state that burns each year. And while that means our acre numbers might be lower, the proportion of our state that burns is still really significant, and it does leave broad and long-lasting consequences. And so some of these impacts you can see here. We have impacts from fires that take place from Mauka to Makai, from the burning of native forests and sensitive habitats, like you see on the upper left, to the post-fire erosion that enters our nearshore waters and smothers coral reefs and impacts fisheries that you see on the bottom left. The impacts not only affect natural resources, but they also impact municipal infrastructure and budgets, traffic, human health that comes during fire from smoke and after fire from dust in the air. And of course, our lives and safety of community members and firefighters are on the line. So we want to show you this map. And what we have here is a map of wildfire ignitions that took place over a 10-year span of years. And there are a few important things we want to point out that we learned from collecting all of our fire agencies' records across the state and then mapping those wildland fires. So first, while you're looking at this map, see if you can notice the trends that I'm talking about. First, fires are being ignited on both windward and leeward sides on every single island in the state. Every red dot on this map is a fire that required a suppression response by our fire agencies. The dots represent each fire. It doesn't represent the total area burned. And we also learned that wildfires are frequently larger on leeward sides because those areas are drier, but under dry conditions, anywhere can burn. You need both ignitions and burnable fuels to have wildfires. And if you look at this map, you can see we have ignitions and fuel everywhere in the state. So at this point, the greatest factor influencing wildfire risk is how dry the vegetation is at any given time per area, and what kind of human behavior choices are made and accidents that may start fire occur. So we do know that 99% of fires are started by people, 75% of those are accidental. And like Nani mentioned above in the takeaways, we think that means that the potential is pretty high to reduce ignitions if our neighbors and the greater public and ourselves have a better awareness and know how to be more careful in the activities we choose to do and when and where. So if we also look at these maps, take a look real quick. Sorry if you have to squint, but on the left-hand side, you can see the summer of 2021 drought map. And that's the image on the left. And you can see that we had those red and orange and yellow spots. And those all show us that we had very dry conditions at different levels of drought, but it was all covered in drought. And you might remember, you can see all the hot spots. And all of those colors indicate above normal wildfire potential. And sure enough, we experienced several large wildfires across the state on all islands, including the record-breaking Mana Road fire that burned more than 40,000 acres on Hawaii Island. So we don't really expect it to get much better this year. The National Weather Service just shared with us last week that the U.S. Drought Monitor on May 9th, which was very recently, appeared like this, and you can see that we are already experiencing severe and extreme drought conditions, and this is our wet season. And so those conditions and expectations for increased drought are only going to persist throughout the summer months and beyond. So what exactly does that mean? It means our potential for wildfire is above normal, it's significant, and that is why you may see that all of our agencies and partner organizations across the state will be launching our annual wildfire awareness and preparedness campaign in a pretty serious way this year. And it's called Wildfire and Drought Look Out. You may be familiar with it. If not, look out for it. The idea here is that we get the message far and wide, and all of our neighbors and the general public is aware and informed about what you can do to prevent and prepare ahead of time for wildfires. So more information will be in the chat box for you, and we'll also mention it again later about that campaign. The important thing as we move forward is to remember, like Nani said, wildfire takes all of us to address. And we really want to emphasize the idea that it takes everyone to protect our lands, our waters, and our people from wildfire. Firefighters do a great job putting out fires, and we're so thankful for all their hard work. And we want to make sure that their needs are always addressed as well, so that they can optimize their response. But everyone needs to help in preventing accidental ignitions, managing the vegetation in your yards and around your neighborhoods, so that fire, if started, cannot burn very far. And it's up to all of us to make sure that our families and our properties are prepared and ready to resist wildfire, better survive wildfire if that situation occurs and there is a wildfire event. So the good news is that wildfire is unlike other natural hazards where you're just stuck with it, and there's actually a lot you can do. So fire can only burn where there's fuel, and you can do a lot about the fuel and manage that, which manages fire behavior and impact. So that's, I think, why everyone's here, to find out what those things are. And you can keep in mind across all of this that you get the most safety and protection when you take proactive actions. You do things way in advance. You're going to hear us saying that over and over again. But here you are, and you're already doing that by attending today and learning more. So we thank you and salute you for that. We want to give you some history or background of the Ready, Set, Go guide and also the program. And that's really, the Ready, Set, Go program is really focused on learning the detailed strategies on the proactive actions that you can take using the principles that are set forth in the Hawaii specific version of the National Ready, Set, Go program. And this information is based on a lot of hard-earned lessons from very destructive fires, during which a high number of fatalities occurred when people evacuated too late and they got caught in smoke and fire-filled roads and traffic. And so what you will learn today covers the entire timeline from before fire season through a fire event, if that should happen, and every step along the way, so that you can really maximize your chances for safety for your home, your family, your yard. And we really thank you for being here to learn all of those steps. All right, so first up is being ready for wildfire. And you can see there are 3 parts of being ready, and we'll go through each of those. The first one is to create defensible space, which really means managing your vegetation surrounding your home. The second is to harden your home, which means that you are making sure your home is made of fire-resistant materials and non-combustible building materials whenever possible. And finally, the third piece is by having and practicing an evacuation plan for your family. and any neighbors who need assistance in the case of wildfire. So those are the ready portions of Ready, Set, Go. And you'll notice that during this webinar, the ready portion takes up a huge amount of time. And that's really because the preparedness, prevention, proactive part is really where you get the most safety and protection. And so there's just so much you can do that we unpack it for quite a bit of time. So we can start with the defensible space first. So being ready and having defensible space means being prepared well in advance of a fire, like way ahead of time. A prepared house means a defendable house. So that is the term defensible space. It's really defendable, able to be defended and protected. A first responder should be able to have enough access and feel like their life isn't in danger to protect a home. And it also means the vegetation is managed in a way that resists wildfire ignition and spread in the first place. So looking at these pictures, you can think about what differences you see between the two. There are differences in greenery. The home on the left has short, hydrated grass, no dead vegetation or debris piles. Trees are spaced and far apart from the home structure, and the driveway has lots of clearance for firefighter access. The picture on the left tells us that, on the right, it shows us these ashy areas where there used to be homes and they were not able to be defended when fire came near. So if you look at these pictures, the black area indicates where fire has come through, and then you can kind of compare and contrast what happened to each house. And it's really likely that those homes that were overwhelmed and burned were because the vegetation was overgrown and unmanaged, or maybe the vegetation was too close to the home. Maybe the home was unreachable or unsafe for firefighters, or some combination of all of the above. And we don't have a lot of local pictures of homes, thankfully, with these kind of side-by-side comparisons, because we have honestly gotten lucky with very few fires reaching the internal lots of communities, and our firefighters have done an amazing job at prioritizing the protection of homes and properties. But with our increased threat of fires, these principles certainly apply to us here, and we don't want to be caught off guard. We want to apply the preparedness and ready principles as much as we can. So in order to prepare for the threat of wildfires in a very logical way, it's important to learn about how structures ignite, and it may be different than many think. So this is a really important piece here. We have a little poll here for you that you see Nani just put up to start us off, thinking about how structures most typically ignite. So go ahead and take a minute to answer how you think structures ignite.
I'm going to give it one more second, Elizabeth.
Okay.
But we're getting high rates of participation in these polls, which
Good.
we appreciate. 2 more seconds. I am going to, some more folks are, okay, last chance, guys. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Let me know if you can't see those, Elizabeth.
Oh, I do see the results, and I feel like so many of you really understand where our biggest vulnerability lies, which is from embers that ignite flammable materials around the home. So that's a really good start, and we'll get into that a little bit more on the next slide. So of course, homes and vegetation can be ignited due to direct contact with flames. But thinking that that's the main way homes get ignited might give some people a false sense of security if their home is in the middle of a neighborhood and not right on the edge of that wildland boundary, because they think only direct flames will ignite the home. But fires can also begin due to radiant heat, when air that's superheated from fires comes into contact with something that has a low heat tolerance. So an example of that might be grass simply igniting from the heat that comes from an idling car's undercarriage or exhaust, even without a spark. I mean, some of our grasses can ignite from this kind of heat, even without a catalytic converter sparking or something like that. It's just the heat, and that's radiant heat. But then most importantly here, like many of you answered, is for you to know that floating embers from nearby fires are one of the greatest sources of ignition. And our greatest risk reduction measure we can take is thinking through where an ember might lie. So embers are little burning bits of vegetation or other materials that are carried by the wind. And sometimes miles later, they can land right in your leaf pile or your leaf-filled rain gutter, or maybe on the dog bed on your lanai, or inside your eave and smolder, potentially igniting a fire on your property or your residence. So ember ignitions are what make a wildfire so dangerous, because because one fire far away can actually start up new fires in multiple parts of a neighborhood at once, depending on whether the ember lands on something that will ignite or not. And then if that happens, then everything is exponentially more exposed to direct flames, radiant heat, and even more embers, because now you've started additional fires that are even closer within your neighborhood. So to address that, we start thinking about defensible space. And defensible space is the buffer you create between a building on your property and the grass, the trees, the shrubs, or any wildland area that might surround your home or neighborhood. And this space is really needed to slow or stop the spread of wildfire, and it helps protect your home from catching fire, either from embers, direct flame, radiant heat, all of the above, but particularly embers. So if the space immediately surrounding your home is unable to sustain flames for an extended period of time, firefighters can actually have the time they need to get in and defend the space from wildfire. If you have defensible space, the chances of your home being safe are much higher, because that will also help resist fire in the first place. And it provides a safe place that firefighters can position themselves to defend the rest of your home or neighborhood. And now, as you look at this graphic, you can see that there are some focal zones. And the first zone of 0 to 5 feet is what's closest to the home, and we call that the non-combustible zone. This zone is designed to protect the building from ignition that can result from wind-blown embers that can accumulate at the base of the exterior wall. So sweep and have it hardened. And it's also the zone where exposure to radiant heat or direct flame contact that would occur due to the ignition of combustible materials nearby or an attached deck might happen. So the second zone, starting to move away from the home, is in the 5 to 30 foot zone. And it's also known as the lean, clean, and green zone. And to create defensible space, it's really important that the vegetation within this zone is lean or minimal. It's clean, so all the brown, dead, dying vegetation is removed, all the debris, leaf litter, etc. is gone. And green, so vegetation is either drought tolerant or well hydrated and looks green and healthy. And we always recommend drought tolerant, fire resistant plants that don't drop leaves and don't need a lot of water, because they need a lot less maintenance and you stay fire safe much longer. The third zone, moving away from the house, can be 30 to 100 feet or beyond if you have a property that's large. We call that the wildland fuel reduction zone. So removing fuels in this zone can reduce the speed and the intensity of a wildland fire as it's traveling through. And if the far reaches of your property are far from your home, but might actually impact your neighbor's property or structures, it's really essential that you also consider that fact and mitigate that risk as soon as you can as well. And this will protect you from fires coming from the outside towards your home. And it'll also protect them as well, because we want to interrupt fire's ability to spread no matter where it starts. And this is that case where being a good neighbor protects everyone, yourself included. And then using these zones to prepare your home against the threat of fire is really crucial. And it's important, even given the caveat that I shared about being a good neighbor, it's important that you focus your time and energy at first within that first zone closest to your home, which is the 0 to 5 foot area. So working your preparedness efforts within this zone will have the greatest impact. It's kind of the biggest bang for your buck in terms of keeping your house protected from wildfire. But after you've worked within zone 1, you continue working away from the house as your time and energy permits. So of course, concurrent is great, and if you can get it all done, but a lot of times we need to start where we're really going to have the most impact. And so start close and then work your way out. And just think through the actions that you might need to take on the perimeters to offer your additional safety to your neighbors, because ultimately that protects your entire neighborhood and your home at the same time. And then now that we've learned how structures ignite and why it's important to create defensible space and manage the vegetation, specifically thinking about how it might resist embers and prevent wildfire spread across your yard and to your home structures, I want to turn it over to Nani, who is going to walk us through some specific tips for creating defensible spaces within these zones and what that actually looks like in real life and not just conceptual. And so these are the actions that you literally can take right away this weekend and every time you are working in your yard.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, so let's start with some practical tips for creating defensible space. Next slide, within that first zone. That's the zone closest to your home, or that first 0 to 5 feet zone. Again, this zone is known as the non-combustible zone. So it's really important that materials within this zone be resistant to ignitions or non-combustible. One practical tip is to not use combustible materials like bark, wood chips, or mulch, but instead use hardscape like gravel, pavers, and concrete. Plants within the zone should be limited to those that grow low to the ground, don't have a lot of woody materials, and those that can be properly watered and maintained. This kind of landscaping is sometimes considered xeriscaped landscapes because the plants need little to no water beyond what the natural climate already provides, thus resulting in being more fire resistant. Another important tip within this zone is to remove all dead and dying plant materials, like Elizabeth mentioned earlier. So we're talking weeds, grass, plants, shrubs, trees, branches, any vegetative debris that's already dying or is on its way out. That means you'll also have to check and possibly clean on a regular basis your roofs, your gutters, the lanai, porches, your stairways underneath those posts and piers in order to remove all that debris that could potentially ignite any embers. Check your propane tanks, make sure they're clear of vegetative debris. Try to limit the combustible items on top of your decks or your lanai, like outdoor furniture or planters or Elizabeth's dog bed. It's been documented actually that embers have ignited homes by initially igniting the outdoor combustible material furniture pieces. You can always reduce the ignition potential by relocating lumber and combustible materials as well away from the home. Final practical tips for this zone would be to replace wooden fencing, your gates, your wooden arbors, any that are attached directly to the home, and replace that with non-combustible alternatives like fire-resistant vinyl or metal. You might also want to consider relocating your garbage or recycling containers if they're housed inside this zone, since these receptacles are commonly create sort of nooks and crannies for ember gathering. Okay, so what can we do in that second zone, the 5 to 30 feet away from the house? Practical tips for this zone should focus on keeping the vegetation lean, like Elizabeth said, in other words, minimal and spread apart, keeping them clean, where all the brown and the dead or dying vegetation is removed, and green, again, where the vegetation looks green and healthy and can deal with any dry conditions or needs minimal watering. It's important in this zone to remove branches that hang over your roof, since these could potentially catch your roof on fire. Remove or prune flammable plants and shrubs to keep that fuel load down. Keep the grass mowed to a maximum height of 4 inches, which can reduce the potential of a fire spreading along the ground. It could even stop the fire in its tracks. On that note, before you move to the next slide, I just read an article yesterday about some firefighters in California having to contain a vegetation fire that ignited in the early afternoon. And it turns out the cause was from someone mowing their grass to reduce fuels for fire danger, but they did it in the afternoon when there was when it was hot. They probably the mower was probably sparky. So immediately new messaging went out from the fire department, reminding everyone to consider the hazards of mowing dry vegetation in the afternoon, especially when the humidity is low, as fires can easily ignite and spread from the use of engines that could spark. So they recommended having an extinguisher nearby and making every effort to mow early in the day. I thought that same thing could apply to us in Hawaii as well. Next screen here, we have fuel ladders. Again, we're in that second defensible zone space, 5 to 30 feet. So keeping vegetation lean within this zone also means reducing those ladder fuels. Ladder fuels are vegetation that can carry a fire that burns in low growing vegetation to nearby taller vegetation. Examples include those low-lying tree branches that you see on the right and shrubs and trees under the canopy of a large tree. Let's see, this is, okay, so now we're still in the 5 to 30. This is also the zone where you might want to consider replacing any or all of the dry fire-prone vegetation with more fire-resistant vegetation. We refer this type of vegetation that's less likely to ignite from embers, fire-wise vegetation. They're often plants that are native to Hawaii because they've already adapted to this climate, they're drought tolerant, and they produce minimal leaf litter. We have a list of native fire-wise plants on our website in the form of a bookmark or a cheat sheet, and I think Elizabeth's going to put that in the chat box as well if you want to download that bookmark. And then the last practical tip for creating space that is defendable is making sure your home is accessible by the fire department. Accessibility for these vehicles means a clearance of 14 feet wide by 14 feet tall. Accessibility is also making sure your address is visible so that the fire department can actually locate your home. This idea of accessibility is often overlooked, so be sure to consider it when you're thinking through your plan for creating defensible space. And next up in our ready portion of the Ready, Set, Go guidelines is home hardening. We have a quick poll for you as it relates to home hardening. You should see that pop up in front of you. And the question is, rate your current understanding around home hardening. Maybe you know what home hardening is and you've already taken steps to harden your home, or you've heard about it, but you're not quite sure what it means, or you've never heard about this concept before. Give you a few more seconds to consider what you currently know about home hardening, and then I'll share back what the results are. Couple more seconds. Thank you for all of your responses. I'm going to end the poll. I see some more coming in. I hate to cut people off. Okay, and ending and sharing. So Elizabeth, it looks like we have a pretty mixed bag of what of the types of folks on the call today. So most of you, you're kind of all equally distributed. So you know, for those that aren't quite sure what the details are or who have never heard about it, this next section is mainly for you. So let's start with the definition. Home hardening addresses the most vulnerable components of your house with building materials and installation techniques that increase resistance to heat, flames, and embers that accompany most wildfires. Home hardening is a very important aspect to your home's survivability during a fire. So any openings or weaknesses where combustible debris can accumulate or where embers can get into your house, that can result in a structure fire that starts from the inside out. Another quick poll, if I can get to it fast enough, is related to your understanding of wildfire resistant building materials. How do they compare in price compared to non-resistant ones? Do you think they're way more expensive? Do you think they're maybe comparable to the non-resistant ones, or maybe they're way cheaper than the non-resistant ones, or really you just don't know? So go ahead and there's no right or wrong. Well, there's no right or wrong answer from you. We'll clear up any misconceptions. Give you another couple seconds. I'm going to end the poll and share the results back. It looks like we're torn between you thinking that the resistant ones are comparable to the non-resistant building materials, and then the other half of you just don't know. Elizabeth, can you tell us a little bit more about your perspectives on this one?
Yeah, so all those answers that everybody put make sense given the diversity of types of materials there are, market values, etc. And so the answer really isn't simple. Starting a new home from scratch with all non-combustible building materials really is the best way to go. But for most of us, we're having to retrofit our existing homes as we can with non-combustible building materials, and those prices really can vary. So for instance, right now, the price of wood is really high. So build that fence out of out of rock or cinder blocks, and then it may actually end up being more affordable because wood is so expensive right now. It's that kind of thing. So everything depends on the work you're doing, how much it costs at that time. But the one thing that we can guarantee is that anything you are able to do or replace is totally worth it to be more fire resistant or non-combustible, especially your roof, your siding, fences and walls. If you think about a wood fence going straight up to the side of your house, it's essentially a wick for fire to travel straight up. So any of those replacements you can do in the end is not just worth the risk, but it's cheaper than rebuilding your whole house. And then you end up with a home that can better withstand fire that does come around. So that's the complicated answer.
Those are good points. Thanks for sharing that. So let's dive deeper, folks, into the specific ways that you can harden your home. Looking at this graph here. On the left side is of this infographic, they've used building materials and installation techniques that increase this house's vulnerability, or I like to say it differently, it reduces its survivability to ember ignitions. And then on the opposite side, on that right side, it depicts building materials and installation techniques that harden the home and increase its survivability. So, looking at the eaves, for example, the right choice would be to close those eaves rather than keep them open where embers can be received. The siding, using fiber cement board rather than wood shingles. For windows, using dual pane tempered ones with screens rather than single paned ones with no screens. For mulch, we talked about that earlier, using materials like rock or cement instead of the wood chips. And then for decks, you want a lot of space between joists to avoid nooks and crannies where embers can land and smolder. And you also want to screen the under area, screen it in to keep the embers out. I am going to play this video really quick. If you hold off on playing it yet, it's from the Insurance Institute of Business and Home Safety's Research Institute. They house a simulator, I think it's in North Carolina, where they conduct highly realistic wildfire simulations to explore how ember storms ignite structures. So as you watch this, you can see it's real live footage of a house where one side has been hardened with non-combustible building materials and the other side is not hardened. You're actually comparing what difference it makes to ember ignitions with hardened versus between non-combustible and combustible materials. So, again, if you want to play that, just let the audience watch it again. While embers are equally hitting both sides of that house, in just a second, you'll see that. Here's the embers in the simulator. They're hitting both sides of the house. The embers that hit that mitigated right side burn out pretty quickly and don't ignite that structure. And then there you go, the side that isn't hardened turns into an active fire there that requires a firefighting response to extinguish it. Thanks for playing that video. And then going to the next screen. So here we have inside our Ready, Set, Go handbook. We will share a link in the chat box later so that you can download it and have access to it yourself. But in the middle of that handbook, in the gutter part, you're going to find this 2-pager for hardening your home. It walks you through every aspect of the housing materials and the installation procedures for how your house can be hardened and better protected. It's crucial to remember that home hardening requires you to think about anywhere where embers could possibly get into your house. This includes any and all gaps and cracks, the uncovered vents, and anywhere leaf litter and other debris might accumulate. We usually see the homes ignite when embers get into those crevices and then into the house. And like Elizabeth mentioned, home hardening can be done during the original build, which is obviously preferred, or of course it can be done as a retrofit later on. That's it for home hardening, and on to the third part, the third and final of the Ready section of the Ready, Set, Go program. And that's evacuation planning. So developing a plan, making sure the whole family is involved and everyone is aware of what's going to happen in the case of a wildfire, and practicing ahead of time is super important part of being prepared for a wildfire. So another quick poll. You guys are getting pretty good at these, and so am I in administering them. So this one's around evacuation planning. And the question is, do you have a plan for how you and your family will evacuate in the event of a fire? You can respond with, yep, and it's written and it's practiced, or yes, but not formally on paper and definitely not practiced by my family, or no, we like to think of a growth mindset, not yet, or something else that I haven't thought of. And these are anonymous, so that should feel good for those that don't have it yet. Okay, we have about 90% participation, so I'm going to end the poll as soon as that last one comes in and share the results back. And it looks like a lot of you have thought about it, have thought about evacuation plan. Maybe it's not formally on paper and it's definitely not practice. And then half of you have not yet started evacuation planning or thinking around it. Okay, so if you haven't made one yet, this next section of the presentation is just for you. Okay, next screen, there you go. So to help you, especially those that don't have an evacuation plan in place yet, there are templates inside the Ready, Set, Go handbook that you and your family can easily use so that your evacuation plan is in writing and on paper. After thinking it through and putting it on paper, it's always good practice to keep the plan somewhere handy and accessible, maybe inside of a junk drawer or on the refrigerator or inside your go bag, but somewhere where it's obvious and accessible and where you'll remember it later on. And then once the plan is on paper, using that template in our handbook, and once it's stored somewhere obvious, you don't want to just stop there. It's really good habit, good practice to practice it, which is just as important as coming up with it. You might want to consider including your friends and neighbors in the plan as well, or helping them with the plan, especially those that might need some extra assistance in evacuating. It's important to remember that not everyone has that capacity to evacuate on their own. So, think through who might need some extra help. Think about our kupuna, our neighbors with disabilities, or people without methods of transportation, those sorts of folks. There's that evacuation plan template inside the Ready, Set, Go handbook also has space for you to fill in the contact information of people on your evac plan, along with 2 meeting location options. So remember, you can't really practice it enough. Practice, practice, practice. You might even find that something on your written plan just doesn't work right when you put it into practice. So it's worth revisiting every once in a while. And then you can at least feel good that you're as prepared as you can in the event of a wildfire. So that wraps up the ready portion of the Ready, Set, Go handbook. And I am going to hand it off to Elizabeth to take us through the set and go portions.
Thank you, Nani. And like Nani said, while the set and go portions of the handbook and even this webinar may take less time and money to talk about and address, they are equally essential to your safety. And so they're super important still. So being set means maintaining awareness or paying attention to what's happening around you. We don't want fire to sneak up on you and catch you off guard. There are plenty of indications if you look around you to let you know when fire hazard is high. And in the fire world, we call that situational awareness. And so this awareness needs to take place in 2 ways. So throughout the year, you can watch the state and the color of the vegetation. Notice when the grass and everything growing around is drying out. Notice when the grass is green, and then when vegetation also begins turning yellow and brown and gray, when it goes from bendy to brittle and pokey, and let that alert you to the increasing fire hazard and hustle that you're going to need to take now to launch you into getting ready for and becoming prepared with all of your ready actions that Nani just covered. Second, you need to keep aware, not just seasonally and across the year for when things are drying out and when you should start really getting your act together, but also you need to keep aware of fire events when they're occurring. So you have to practice that situational awareness when there's a fire anywhere near you or your area in the general vicinity. So during a fire and through the day, you should know and remember that winds change, they change rapidly. So just please don't assume that because of fire or its smoke that they look far away and that wind is blowing away from your neighborhood and you're all good. That's happening way over there. I can watch it, but I don't have to worry. Don't assume it's going to remain that way. Stay alert and be aware and be hyper vigilant in maintaining awareness exactly about the status of the fire, and even pay attention to what the wind is doing. Watch the clouds, really pay attention. You can be part of following and predicting what's about to happen. And so you can be on top of it yourself as well. So in this picture, there was a fire in West Maui, and it looked at first to be blowing uphill. You can watch the smoke direction and imagine which way the wind is blowing, which is also away from residential areas. It's kind of off there in the distance, even past some ag lands. And then on the next slide, you can see that later in the day, not much later, the winds changed. Of course, we have land, sea breezes. There's a lot of factors influencing wind. And when the wind changed, the fire and the smoke traveled exactly in the opposite direction and started additional spot fires. And those directly threaten lives and homes in that area that had previously just been watching from afar. So fires can travel fast. They can change directions quickly and often. So staying vigilant, staying situationally aware keeps you in that set mode, and that will help you and your family to remain as prepared as possible. Now, remember, we talked about this before. We did the poll on it. We can't emphasize this enough, that fires don't just happen from direct flame contact. So it also happens from superheated air, and also, and most importantly, from embers that are floating in the wind that can travel miles and ignite whatever they land on, including debris in roof gutters, like we talked about, green waste piles, your outdoor furniture. We've mentioned that several times, the nooks and crannies all around your home. And even, going through a window or under your lanai and burning your home from the inside out. And Nani explained a lot of that earlier. And so for this reason, even a fire that's occurring sort of close by, off over there, say several miles, it's still a threat that you need to be aware of, wary of, and prepared to deal with. And now for the go portion of Ready, Set, Go program. We'll start off by watching this video. It's a driver who documented his escape, which was probably too late, from an ember storm in a 2016 fire that took place in Canada. But you can see here, notice the traffic, notice the smoke. Keep in mind that even while cars are moving slowly, people's minds and hearts are racing. They're often scared, and that can lead to medical issues and accidents on top of traffic that's holding you back, making you go slow, and putting you in harm's way for smoke impacts and for fire actually consuming over the road, etc. And so this is where we really want to stress. Really, it should be called Ready, Set, Go early, not just go, because we really want to emphasize that this portion is to go early, and it's really better for everyone to evacuate early. We need to keep the roads as clear as possible for emergency responders. And we all need to get out as early as possible before the stress of everything piles up. Our options are limited. We're stressed and scared, and so is everybody else. And then we're even more and more in harm's way. So ideally, you've been paying attention all season, all day. You're ready already because you've been doing that for months every weekend when you do your yard work. You have been using your situational awareness to track what's happening over time and even that day. And then you can use your own judgment to leave early. And then you go with that peace and comfort of knowing that you and your family and your home are as prepared as possible. And that it's actually the responsible, respectful, safest thing to do to get out of there early, get out of the area early, even before an evacuation order comes out. And I'm going to pause here for a minute because there was a question in the Q&A that I noted that where somebody asked, well, shouldn't we stay and water our roofs? Does that have an impact? Is that safe? Is that really what we should be doing? And the answer is a resounding no. That's old school. There was messaging that went out decades ago that really promoted stay and defend. We need all hands on deck. Everybody get to where you can be helping with your own home and you can stay and you can protect it. And that led to enormous numbers of fatalities. It leads to search and rescue operations that have to be diverted away from the fire when people get stuck inside the fire zone and they can't get out. It adds to late evacuation traffic and mucks up the road for people trying to get out. And remember, emergency responders are also trying to get in. And many of our communities have only one ingress egress. So that sort of answers the question in the Q&A, is that Oh, and I forgot one thing is if you're using water, we have very few areas where we have just tons of water and water pressure. And so you're actually doing a disservice in many ways where to take away firefighting resources. And so the answer is that's super long time ago recommendations, and we've learned a lot since then. And now the message is leave early. So just go. And we do want to point out that this recommendation is based on a lot of analyses and lessons learned on how we can best reduce risk. The majority of fatalities, like I said, occur in congested evacuation traffic. So you can always go early, way before an evacuation order. I mean, it's your home. You can go to the beach, you can go shopping, you can do whatever you want to do, get far out of the zone. And if it's really not a threat and there's no evacuation needed, you can go back home. Helping to do your part to clear out the road, etc. So even though we're saying like go, leave early, use your own judgment, your own situational awareness, contribute to the solution and the firefighting, not be part of the problem, we do want to make sure that you are staying alert as well to the formal and official evacuation orders that are issued, and that you are following the directives given to you by those who are coordinating the safest exit and shelter plans given the situation. And that's especially important if you haven't been able to leave early. I mean, if you're way on the outside, you can be tracking, you can be knowledgeable, you can know what's going on, you can assist, texting and helping other people know. So it's not incompatible if you've left early, but do stay alert, whether you're leaving early or leaving right on time. Sign up for your county's emergency management or civil defense alerts, as those are the agencies that will be coordinating and issuing directives and information. And I think Nani is going to, or already pasted a link for you in the chat box so that you can have that link and go ahead and get signed up. And with that, that concludes the Ready, Set, Go portions of this webinar and the program. And everything we mentioned will coincide with what you find in the Ready, Set, Go personal wildland fire action guide. So it's basically, a 20-page pamphlet, or it has really hard cardstock covers so that it can be used by you. It can last a long time. You can pass it along. Please do. We also have digital versions, and we'll get to how you can get those materials in a minute. But just to summarize what we've covered today, to start taking action around the Ready, Set, Go principles that you learned. And just quick reminder, you want to have your yard ready with the those that are more fire resistant and non-combustible. You want your family to be as prepared as possible well in advance of a fire with an evacuation plan, and having it completed, having it practiced, and remember to include any neighbors who might need assistance in planning or evacuating, and include them by staying alert throughout the year, by noticing when things are getting dry and when you really start to have to ramp up your actions and preparedness. And we want you to stay alert during any nearby fire events. And then finally, it's that piece of go early, if at all possible, so that you are out of harm's way, optimally safe, and contribute to better flow out during the evacuation for all of your neighbors, and flow in for our emergency responders who need to get in there and help. So if you could follow these recommendations, really any piece of them, they all add up to make a difference and get you, farther along the way of being prepared. The more you do, the more comfort and peace you have, knowing that you've done all you can and you're prepared to leave early if need be. You're prepared if something comes upon you and is a surprise and you weren't expecting it. Everything's done already. And so we want to make sure that you know that the comprehensive Hawaii specific Ready, Set, Go handbook is available digitally on our website. Paper copies are also available if you would like to request them. You can even do so in bulk with an intent to distribute them more widely with your neighborhoods or at social events or local restaurants, etc. And Nani's posting that information in the chat box. And you always can go to our website, hawaiiwildfire.org. And we have a lot of our information on there. And And you can also email us easily at admin@hawaiiwildfire.org. That is an address we check frequently, and we'll be able to help you out with any of your specific needs.
This year, folks, we are offering everybody on today's webinar a chance to earn some cool landscaping gear. I noticed folks are commenting in the chat, and it looks like they might pop off. Just hold off 30 seconds. This is a raffle. There are two options for, and winners can pick which one they want emailed to them. And we're calling it our Ready, Set, Go Action Challenge. And this is for you guys on the call today. We're challenging you to put what you learned today into some on-the-ground action. All you have to do is complete a simple online checklist of actions that Elizabeth will put in the chat box. These are actions that you take around your house and yard to prepare for the upcoming fire season, and then send us a couple pictures or videos of you taking those actions. Check your inbox on June 16th to see if you are one of our 10 winners. This challenge starts as of right now and ends on June 15th. Thanks, Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, we do have them on the line for a couple more minutes. You want to share about the Wildfire and Drought Lookout?
Yes, I was also trying to respond to people asking to see the Q&A, and I think Nani had mentioned it, or you're going to mention it, but we're going to stay on the line and continue to unpack some of those questions. A lot of my answers were like, we'll get to that. So just so you know, you're not missing a ton, but we will try to make sure everybody has the information. Okay, so for the Wildfire and Drought Lookout campaign, which I alluded to earlier on, we're launching it far and wide, and we welcome your assistance with getting the message out as well. Because of the fire and drought forecast for this summer. We wanted to make sure you know what resources are available to you as part of this more simplified version of these preparedness tips. So if you are interested in a simpler fact sheet that covers some of the key Ready, Set, Go actions, and also includes a little section on how we can all prevent the most common forms of accidental fire ignitions in Hawaii. That information is available on the Wildfire and Drought Lookout webpage. And again, it's a statewide information campaign. All agencies are endorsing. We are, all fire agencies, and many others, including forestry, watershed partnership, and many of our private business partners as well. So we specifically encourage you to pass out the information to your neighbors, to associations, friends, family members, and in order to help ensure that everybody knows at least the basics about how to get prepared, and also is that we all are helping to get the word out so that our awareness of fire in Hawaii catches up with the reality that there is actually fire and fire issues and a need to be prepared across Hawaii. It's an ongoing hazard. And we want to make sure people are connected to the basics of what they can do to keep their homes, their families, yards, and communities safe. And just to let you know, this year's campaign will be launched on June 1st by all of the partners who are going to start really broadcasting this information, and hopefully you will help with that too. And it's going to continue on through the summer months and into the early fall. So Nani's pasting the Wildfire and Drought Lookout webpage into the chat. You can check that out when you have time.
Also, if you're interested in joining together with your neighbors, we invite you to learn about becoming a nationally recognized FireWise community if you aren't already. I know we have a lot of you on today's call that are. This national program is led by the National Fire Protection Association, and in partnership with our State Division of Forestry and Wildlife, Hawaii Wildfire serves as the regional coordinator of the Hawaii chapter of the program. There's currently 15 communities across the state that participate. Again, I think there's like 55 of you on today's call, and each community has a handful of movers and shakers that commit to taking the lead on their community's efforts around fire education and mitigation. That's 66 total movers and shakers we have across our state. Last year alone, collectively, these FireWise communities, they reached more than 71,000 friends and neighbors. They also reported reducing more than 2,300 cubic yards of hazardous vegetation in and around their homes and communities. They contributed more than 11,000 volunteer hours to their community or individual FireWise efforts, and they invested in volunteer hours and cash just over $850,000 in making their communities more informed and more prepared for fire. Our communities care, and it's obvious, and they're working really hard to do their part in keeping our our island communities, our first responders, our resources safe from fire. So I want to applaud them for those efforts. If you're interested in learning more about this program, please check out our website or reach out to us, and we can follow up with more information. And 2 more slides. You can also learn more about our organization at hawaiiwildfire.org. You can follow us on social media, and you can subscribe to our HWMO newsletters for additional wildfire related news and tools and workshops and other communications. And as a last slide, we want to say that remind you that there is greater protection for the entire community when everybody participates proactively. So when you take actions around your homes and with your neighbors, it all adds up. And it adds up to reduce the fire spread and the impacts for everyone and across not just our homes, but our natural resources and communities. So thank you again for joining us today and for doing your part, and for getting started right away on any actions you can to be ready for this season. We also want to thank our county and state fire and emergency management agencies and the responders themselves, the county, the state, the federal, the volunteer ones. We have our CERT community, we have our FireWise communities, our natural resource managers, our watershed partnerships, our elected officials who prioritize wildfire mitigation in their budgets. The list goes on, and I apologize if I missed anyone. And I want to do one more shout out to the organizations that made this webinar possible. That is Hawaiian Electric, the Richard Smart Fund of Hawaii Community Foundation, and the State Division of Forestry and Wildlife. And that we will stick around to address some of the questions or thoughts that came up, but this does formally conclude today's webinar. One final request before leaving us today. Please click on the link in the chat box and spend 10 seconds anytime today completing the quick feedback form on how we did today. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate you. Thank you for showing up and doing your part for all of us. And we hope to see you again.